how is your concept of personality? I mean, I understand it well from your book, but how does that relate to the concept of ego from other, like, I mean, are they synonyms or is there some distinction?
That's It's a difficult word, I think, ego, because it can be used in different ways. I think some people align it with the self by saying, well, we need an ego, don't they? To function, is what I mean by the self. And some align it with ego, you're egotistical, meaning you're overly occupied with your own image and all of that. And then it's immediately like a slur, isn't it? A negative. So again, it's tricky. It depends how you use it. The way I use personality, I feel, is very wide. And because it is a wide thing, there's so many, ego is just seen as like, oh, you're overly, you're conceited or whatever. But the ego is, sorry, the personality, as you know, it's got so many different sides and manifestations. It's got beliefs, it's got patterns, and all sorts of different patterns. I mean, just being egotistical would be one of those patterns, you could say, whereas being lack of self-love would be the opposite sort of pattern. So there's strategies, there's beliefs, there's personality thinking, there's so many things involved in it that to me the word ego is just so narrow in a way, and less precise because of that. So yeah, I mean, I think you have to understand the full gamut, the whole range of what personality is and how it works and how it kind of enslaves you, really. I think the use of the word, the way I use it and the way I look at all sides of it is part of understanding that. So it's quite important. It's partly to do with getting clear on what it is. And it needs this heading and all these different subdivisions to kind of cater for all of that. And the distinction between the personality and the self, I'm actually writing something on this now, is vital as well. And of course, the key thing there is that, the way of looking at it is that the personality is like the false self. That's the way Gurdjieff used it, defined it. And, it's so the important thing about the self is that the self is a word used here to define the neutrality of it. It's before all that partiality of the personality comes in and all of its needs and its strategies. Whereas so the self is just very pure. And so the self is aligned to like your, original state. Whereas as soon as there's triggering going on or emotion, that's personality. So that's another way by contrast to understand the difference between self and personality. And of course, we do need a self. I mean, and that is a difference because there is a lot of spiritual stuff up there which is all about dropping the self or going beyond the self. And here I'm talking about we need the self. Self is a beautiful thing, the idea of a self. It is an idea. So it's the understanding and the knowing that it is an idea, but still it's an idea that in human life, this is how we live and this is what we live out. But you can live it out without the overlay of the personality and the suffering that comes with that. I mean, to me, that's what the Buddha's message was,
In psychology, there's a concept of the persona, which I actually looked it up, and it's Carl Jung came up with this one. So the persona, the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, was the social face the individual presented to the world, a kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual.
If persona is construed as meaning same as personality, and it sounds like it does, the question arises, do we need to have a persona? Is that a good thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And somebody would say, well, of course everyone does. It's like, well, of course I would call that the self, which is different. And what is the difference?
Yeah.
The difference is just the self is neutral, meaning it's not informed by the wound and the whole history. Right? So that's a big difference. So yeah, in the world, it's expected that they even say that phrase like, "Oh, he's got a good personality," right? Which to us sounds crazy, but yeah, he's got a big personality or and I know they're using it in a slightly broader, different way, but still, yeah. So I think the question is, is it a good thing to have a personality? You could have, for example, you could be in that situation that's awkward because people are perhaps projecting on you a lot, and you could have a personality that was kind of, say, let's say, egotistical, puffed up, and it would bounce all that off, and it would work in a way because you wouldn't be vulnerable. You would think it was just them, and so I suppose that's what people mean when the personality is working well. It's sort of defending you well. You're not at the whims and the kind of judgments of others so much in that scenario with that kind of personality. So you could say, oh yeah, that's good, that works. But we're looking sort of deeper than that here. So it may work and it may protect you from things, but we're looking at, well, what can you be the self, what you find yourself to be, your natural state and whatever expression that takes at the moment? Can you be that in the world with whoever's out there, whatever difficult personalities, whatever they're projecting on you? That's what's interesting to me. That's what this is about. Rather than I've got a good mask which I'm going to put on, which deflects, because that's a kind of doing. It's okay and it has a job, but it's not really the subject we're talking about here. So then the next thing is like, well, what is that? Is that okay? Is that even possible? What does it mean that you go out into the world and you are without the protection of that personality, but you are still protected in a way? Okay, so what are you protected by? I want to say you're protected by your own naturalness, if that makes sense. It's like if you are intrinsically in touch with who you are beyond personality, then your need for validation, or you're being hooked into the judgments and opinions of those out there, well, it's certainly very different. I mean, you don't really, it's not your main goal. I mean, of course, it's nice if people like you and you get on. Of course, that is good and you like that. But it's not like a need. It's not like a desire. It's not a kind of addiction to produce that in others. Because before that, there's this kind of okayness with what we're really talking about is your original relationship to life. Really, that's the subject here, I think. If you're within that, you're just already okay, kind of, before what happens out there. Then the question is, well, how do you have that? How do you find that? And that's what we're doing. That's what we're talking about every week here.